Hello Lightning Leaders, and welcome back to another math video. Today we're going to talk about telling time on an analog clock. Now this is something that I have been forcing you to do all year in the classroom, even though some of you still tell me that you can't do it. Now, if you were at Franklin last year, I know for a fact we did a unit on telling time. But I know that was a year ago and we don't have a lot of analog clocks around anymore. So if you're not using the skill, you lose it. But we're going to talk about it here today because it's an important skill to have. Now, it's kind of hard to do here in my bedroom because I don't have all of my teaching stuff because my giant clock that I use during the actual lesson is sitting in the cabinet in my classroom. So I took a lid from a pot in the kitchen and I drew a circle here, and we're going to do the best we can with it. Now, when it comes to telling time on an analog clock, it's important to understand the rules with the two hands that are on the clock. Now, there's technically three hands, but we're not going to worry about the third one because that's the second hand. And that's the one that's constantly going around, never stopping, tick, 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 tick. We're not going to worry about that one. We're just going to talk about the hour hand and the minute hand. Now, I'm going to start with the hour hand. Now, the hour hand is the smaller of the two hands. I'm going to take my ruler here, which I actually ended up finding deep in a bin somewhere. I've had this thing since middle school. This thing's ancient. And I'm going to just draw a little arrow here. So now this smaller hand here is pointing to the 9, which means my time is going to start at the hour 9. Now I need a minute hand. Now the minute hand is the longer of the two hands, and the minute hand is what comes second when you are reading a clock. So let's see here. I'm just going to, I don't know, let's see. Let's go right over here. Notice how my minute hand is longer than my hour hand. So when I'm reading the clock, I need to start with my hour and then go to my minutes. So let's look at this clock here. My hour hand is pointing to the 9. So 9 o'clock is the hour. Now I need to go to my minute hand. Now the minute hand is pointing to the 2. The time is not 9:02, because if we look at this clock here, and we look, there's only 12 numbers. Well, we know that we can have more than 12 minutes, because we know there's 60 minutes in an hour. So the time is not 9:02. That's not the time. There's something that we need to remember about the numbers on the clock, and that is every single number. Actually, I'm going to move this 9 down a little bit so I have some more space here. Every single number on the clock also represents a certain number of minutes. Each number as it's written on the clock represents an hour, but they also represent a certain number of minutes. Every single time you move one number on the clock, you're actually jumping 5 minutes. So I'm going to continue labeling all the way around. And now we've gone from 0 to 60 all the way around the clock. So now I'm ready to figure out what time it is. Since this minute hand is pointing towards the 2, I need to count by 5s from 12, or I should say 5s from the 12 on the clock, to figure out how many minutes it actually is. So I start at 0 and I go 0, 5, 10. So the time is 9:10. Let's try another one. And this time I'm going to make it a little trickier with the hour hand. Erase that. Erase that. This time, let's see, let's do something like this. I'm gonna have the hour hand do something like that. And then the minute hand, it's gonna do something like this. Okay. Actually, I'm gonna make that minute hand a little longer here so it really stands out. There we go. All right, let's look at this. Now, back when we were starting our telling time unit way back in 3rd grade, a lot of you wanted to tell me that the time right now is 7:11. Well, from the last question, we learned that the minute hand, we don't use the numbers on the clock to name the minutes. We jump by 5s all the way around. So we know that the minutes are not 11. But I'm going to tell you right now, the hour is also not 7. But Mr. S, that green hour hand is really pointing towards that 7. Sure looks like it, doesn't it? But look where our minute hand is. It hasn't gone all the way around the circle yet. So when we're trying to figure out the number that is our hour, what we need to do is we need to look at what two numbers is it in between. So the hour hand is in between the 6 and the 7, and you actually pick the lower of the two numbers. So since the hour hand is between the 6 and the 7, our hour is actually 6. And then when we switch over to our minute hand, we count 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50. The time is 6:55. Very tricky. This is the hardest thing about telling time on the analog clock. Usually, we learn the counting by 5s pretty quickly. We learn that one. The hardest thing is understanding how to figure out what the hour is. And when the hour hand is in between two numbers, you pick the smaller of the two numbers every single time. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to pause the video, and when we come back together, I'm going to have a real analog clock. I just so happen to have one hanging on the wall in my bedroom here. And we're going to use that analog clock to try to come up with a few more times together and really practice this hour hand being in between two numbers. Be right back. All right, Lightning Leaders, welcome back. Hopefully you can hear me over the roar of it. Sounds like someone's releasing all the gas out of their snowblower outside, so hopefully you can still hear me over that roar of the engine. What we're looking at here is an analog clock, and we're going to work together to figure out what time it's reading right now. We want to start with the smaller hand because that is the hour hand. Now, if we think about the rule that I told you about over on the clock on the whiteboard, we need to look at the two numbers that it's between, and it's directly between the 11 and the 12, which means that we need to pick the smaller of the two numbers, so our hour is 11. Now we need to look at where the minute hand is, and it's right on that 4. So if we start counting 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, the time is now 11:20. Now, one thing I didn't put on the whiteboard one because it would not have looked very good, and I would not have done a good job with it, is if you notice, there's these tiny little marks in between each of the numbers on the clock. And each of those little marks equals 1 minute. So you can get even more precise with the times. If you notice, since we've been talking, the minute hand is moved. And now it's gone on from the 4 to this first little tick mark. So it's no longer 11:20, it's 11:21. I'm going to change the time on this clock again, and let's try to figure out a new time. Let's see here. Let's try... Ooh. Let's try this. I want to show you something here. Look how I have the clock here at 5 o'clock, but look how that hour hand is already past the 5 a little bit. And that's kind of a little annoying because if I go back just a little bit to 4:55. It looks like the hour hand's between the 5 and the 6. This time looks like it's 5:56. But if we were to go to 5:56, we'd see that the hour hand would be much closer to the 6. So let's see. Let's try this time right here. Let's look at our hour hand, and I'm going to get my trusty ruler in here to really help us see this. We are not quite at the 4 yet. We can see that. We're not quite there. So we're between the 3 and the 4. Now, since we're between the two numbers, we need to pick the smaller of the two. So the hour is 3. And then if we count by our 5s, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, the time is 3:45. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a bunch of clocks up on the whiteboard. And I'm going to have you figure out what time each clock is reading. So I'm going to put a cut in the video, be right back. Alright, Lightning Leaders, I've drawn 3 clocks up on the whiteboard. And what I'd like you to do is figure out the time that each clock is showing. And then if this is the video you choose to respond to, send me your answers. I'll see you next time. I have a very special math video planned for Friday. See you then.